Alrighty, guys. Hey, thanks for joining the discussion. This one is a special one. One of one of the gentlemen that's always in the chats, in the comment sections, and always putting his 2 cents in, pretty much $1 because it's worth so much. But putting in his information and his knowledge into some of the content that I make, and then also refining my content and sharpening me. But we got our brother Dan Tuku here. And we're going to talk about the 12-factor app. This was something that was brought up in a previous live stream where he talked about it or mentioned it. And it's something that I read like the first 3 things on. And then after that, I was like, listen, I want to get you on the channel. Let's talk about this, possibly turn this into a series. So hopefully this could be the first of many, and hopefully be like maybe a 4-part series. And we're also talking about some other things that we may do because he's very busy and so am I. But we may do to actually bring this content to another level in terms of like helping people out. So we'll see about that and we'll work on it. But Dan, can you go ahead and introduce yourself, man, and tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do as best as you can. And guys, he does have NDAs and stuff like that. So some things we can and cannot talk about.
Yeah, sure. Well, as you know, my name is Daniel. I work as a DevOps engineering manager. So DevOps stands for development and operations. So I usually would have 2 people working with me, a development operations engineer and a senior engineer. They have slightly different roles, but anyways, application development, deployment, configuration, that's kind of where my area of expertise is when it comes to information technology.
Yeah, so in DevOps, as we know, or the little bit that we know about it, they're the guys that not only not so much run the code, because even with DevOps, they're like the guys that, and you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but as I know DevOps, they're the guys that make sure that the code runs and write tools and tools for systems and other things to make sure that the code platform and other things actually run properly. So it's like I like to say it's almost like a code, what's it called? A programming or code engineer meets a knock guy, and they come together and they're like making sure not just the network is up, but making sure that the entire platform is up and doing what they can to triage and fix anything. So your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a fairly good description of what a DevOps engineer does, but also it just varies from company to company. Some companies may have the title DevOps engineer, but really you're just a systems administrator, right? Or it may be, or you may be like a developer that moves into a new role and they just call it a DevOps engineer, and really you're just a software developer that uses like infrastructure as code methodologies for deploying applications. So it depends. So in my environment, for example, we're a hybrid environment. So we have some of our software that's on premises and some of our software that's in the cloud. So I get to touch a little bit of everything in my position.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that with in terms of what you talked about with engineering, or that software engineer that moves into a DevOps position. So I always think the DevOps person is almost like a super smart plumber. Making sure isn't always seen in a sense, but you don't want to be without that person because they're making sure your stuff runs. Is another way I look at it in terms of its importance for everything.
Yeah, as long as people don't know you exist, you're doing your job right. That's the way I see it. And really, yeah, it's much easier for a person coming from, well, let me say this. It can be much easier for a person coming from the development side of IT to, get into DevOps, but operations, it'll take a little more work. And I come from the operations side.
Operations side. Okay. Okay. So the operations side, is that like more system engineering is what you think is how you would define operations?
Right. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. And you said something that was really cool is infrastructure as code, IaaS. And that's like tools like your Terraform to manage that stuff, to build or to stand up new systems or environments and tear them down instantly, with a couple, lines of code or a couple commands, and your infrastructure is now getting to be more configurable. So you're seeing more things like that, that not only, the stuff that's ran before Ansible. So it's like an Ansible, but it's like an Ansible to set up your systems, to set up your actual environment. Whereas Ansible runs usually after, you actually have your environment set up or your system set up. But I have heard more Ansible stuff getting done. What's it called? Bringing up your whole systems. Jermaine, what's up, brother? Hey, man, that's my brother from another mother right there, Jermaine, man. Thanks for showing up as always, bro.
Yeah, on the infrastructure as code side, yeah. So Terraform, you would most likely end up using that to deploy like virtual machines, especially in a hybrid environment. That's one way that I use it. Mm-hmm. And I use Ansible to come right behind that and configure the machine. Or you can use a combination of Ansible and shell scripts. Just depends on how well you use Ansible.
Yeah, and also your preference, because you can do so much with it. I want to get more into Ansible, but now I'm working mainly on monitoring right now, and that's not the piece that I'm like working on in my day job in the project I'm working on. But yeah, I definitely want to get more into Ansible, just to know it at least. But yeah, that would be really cool to get more into that. I know you had a question for me. Do you remember it? I think I have pieces of it.
Yeah. One question I did have for you, because I noticed you worked on scripts a lot. Like, how did you go from, I guess, where did you start, and what brought you to this point?
So mainly, I started off working with like systems, and I used to have what my friend dubbed Mama's House hosting. Jermaine knows about this. I've known Jermaine he was my business partner for 10 years, but I've known him going close to 20 years now. So like maybe 15 years. But Jermaine could tell you about my hosting environment in my mom's garage and like getting that. So I was a hardware guy, data storage, using GlusterFS, the operating system and the binary, getting into things like ZFS later on, OpenNAS and all that other stuff. And then, I had a computer consulting job before I started my business with Jermaine. And my boss always said, he's like, listen, man, one day you're gonna have to learn how to program. And I was like totally adverse to it. I was like, no, it's not happening. Like, forget it. And then I started to get more into it, and I was like, you know what? Let me embrace this, because I was working a night job and it wasn't really doing much of anything. A beast co-location at home. Yeah, Jermaine used to always say, man, bro, you got stuff in your garage that some people can't even afford to put in there, like for their business in their office. But yeah, I used to have crazy stuff, and that electricity bill was crazy. But yeah, then over time I got into more coding and programming, and I started working on my own projects. One of the first projects was the GrowBox project. The Raspberry Pi is something that's near and dear to me as a hobbyist, because it was something that I was like, holy crap, I can do this and control all this other stuff and don't have to, call on these expensive pieces and stuff like that. They're making all these little sensors and everything, and all that stuff is available to me, so that's kind of how I really got into it, bringing me up to this point now where it's like code everything. And that's also been now a bit of a hindrance, because I code first instead of doing simple solutions, or I usually do more bespoke custom solutions nowadays. And that's not always good. And I'm kind of like learning to get better and find a middle ground with that in my current job now.
Oh, nice, man. I was always kind of curious, because you seemed like in the early days when I first saw you on one of the panels. It was one of the Coliseum panels.
Yeah.
How long ago was that anyway?
2017 is when I first got on like BGS's panels.
Yeah.
And I was in the MGTOW movement, or in the MGTOW spaces and comment sections videos, 2015. And then, even when I was, during that time is when I started like the GrowBox project. That's how old that project is.
Yeah, I remember I think you sent me a link to the repository when you had it in one of those cloud repos. I forgot what it was. It just gave me a demo.
Yeah,
I was just kind of curious because for a while I didn't see you, and then all of a sudden you had a channel. I was like, oh, Chris.
Yeah.
See what he's up to.
Yeah, I try to do a little bit more now because just finding quote unquote my voice or what I want to do. And now it's just like really helping people. So helping people with mindset, finances as best as possible, mostly my MGTOW brothers, because a lot of our MGTOW brothers, they get caught in the red pill rage, but there's a point after that. There's a point of not disliking women strongly or anything like that, but really understanding them and moving on and getting to a better point in your life, and how you actually want to live it. And then of course, so mindset, finance, and then of course coding. And that's another thing where it's like the coding, the stuff I do on the channel, Obfuscate streams, is more or less so I can put myself out there, and then have you guys as my coach, if you will, or somebody that keeps me on task to a certain extent.
All right, yeah, man. The cycle of red pill rage is it's a beast.
Yeah,
get out of it, man. It's unfortunate, but some people don't get out of it.
Yeah, sadly, and that's what happens, and that's kind of like the whole point of what this space is really about. As I came into it, and to see it, not get perverted or become perverse, but and, it's going down a path that I don't totally like, because it's not really teaching so much about understanding. Now it's like getting into the quick clips and talking points. Guys are still getting caught up in stuff that they don't know how to get out of, because they're given fish instead of being taught how to fish, in a sense, to a certain extent. And that's only for the guys that want it, because some of them just don't. So there's also that part.
Absolutely, man. I don't frequent a lot of those channels I used to go to. I go to your channel because obviously you cover finance, and I think it's like the first video I saw of yours was when you were, you were kind of walking through the property you currently own now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was just major inspiration. Like, oh man, that's nice. This dude has a lake. He's a guy. He has an open field in the back. Yeah, it was pretty nice, man. And
bro, it's beautiful to do that. It's beautiful to, like, one, for me to experience it and, like, see it. But then it's also like the inspiration that it gives other people, because then a lot of people just, until they see you do it, they don't think that they can do it. And then they realize, like, look, I've been with this guy or knew this guy for a longer period of time or a long period of time, and he did it. And, like, it's kind of one of those, it demystifies things, or kind of brings it to a level. It's like, so you don't have to be this super rich person to get X, Y, and Z. There are ways to get, all that, even at your current level, or you're close to it and you can achieve it.
Yeah, I told a few buddies of mine. Well, I told a few buddies of mine, I should say, to check out your channel.
Oh, thanks, man.
Oh yeah. Hopefully they've been checking in, man. But I tell them this is a good channel if you want to go to and learn a little bit of something, share some knowledge.
Yeah, and so we'll jump into this, because I know your time is going to be a little bit spotty here in the next couple of minutes, but I wanted to at least get this started. So excuse me for moving this one forward, because I definitely want to get to this. So this is something that Daniel put in the chat, the 12-factor app. Dan, do you want to introduce this? Because I don't know if I really want to go through the full introduction because of your limited time with you.
Sure, yeah, no problem. So the 12-factor app is on this site, it describes the methodology in the way in which software as a service is more so developed nowadays, or at least the best, I would say, best practices, because this is the practices that we follow within the organization I currently work with. And I've seen a major improvement just following this approach when it comes to developing web services for the modern day.
Okay, so you talk about, like, major improvement, like in what areas? In terms of performance, writing it, fixing problems, finding them?
Okay. Yes. Oh, not me, great.
No, you're not. There you go.
It kind of an improvement in all those things. So, for example, if you scroll down a list, for example, there are some companies, and I'm going to say this, they don't have a code base. They don't have a central repository to store the code. It's on one person's computer.
Oof.
Yeah. I'll give an example. I'm fairly certain, or I'm hoping that this company has upgraded, but they had one developer, and this one developer, they would work with contractors from time to time, but this developer would have to literally make a copy of the source and give it to that person. That person would make the changes and give a copy back to that person. Yeah.
No.
So, this is before I was even working within the realm of Git administration, right? This is before I even knew anything about it. And even at that point, I knew it was wrong. But that's not the first time I've seen that. So, like, for example, just managing your code base. This is one aspect of it. If you actually click on it and you go into it, it kind of gives like a brief description as to why it's good to have a revision control system. But then you go down to the next principle.
So there's code base. So one code base tracked in version control, many deploys. And the little bit that I know about this, like for instance, working with Jermaine, is that, okay, we have the app and then it's on GitHub, but now I'm getting to the point where it's like, okay, in terms of development, I need to have a dev environment, right? And I need to have that set up. And that's one thing I haven't done, where I've just worked on the live code base. And then, you can get away with it only but for so long.
Right. That's dangerous, man. I do not recommend that for anybody, dude. That's kind of like working in a WordPress environment if you're new to it.
Yeah, like the problem I would have is that, I use PM2 for my process management, PM2, which is process management software. It does clustering and all types of other stuff. But every time you save code or save a file within certain directories, it'll watch it and then it'll restart the app. So that can cause serious issues. And that's okay. And that's well and good. But it's like, I need a dev environment. So I had to start writing if statements and stuff like that in my code. Like if this, then, if the environment variable says dev, then, or prod, do this, So I'm starting to get that a little bit more, and make that a little bit more robust, if you will, to where it's like it can know what environment it's in and I'm running it properly.
And you can get rid of those if statements just using the config section of the 12-factor app, because there's a configuration management system that you can use. Like, for example, I use for web applications in particular, I set the config in the cloud to where every environment has its own config for it. So like if you have a specific database you need to connect to, you have specific credentials you need to use. For example, if you're using Mailgun, or if you're using even Kubernetes, for example, you'll have different credentials for Kubernetes for a different namespace, right? So, I mean, yeah, this stuff is great because, like, for example, whenever I set up a different pipeline for a particular application, or at least one of the services within the application, because we have more so of a distributed system at this point. So if I set up a pipeline for, let's say we have 2 staging environments and we have 3 test environments. And when I say test environments, they get deployed just like the staging environment and the production environment. It's just, it may have a different code branch. For example, if you have you used Jira before?
I've used other Confluence products, but I do want to talk about the config file stuff. So let's, I want to bookmark that, but go ahead with what you're talking about.
Well, it doesn't matter. I can show you this some other time.
Talk about it. I just want to, go, man. Like, come on.
So if you have let's say you have like a Jira issue, or let's say it's like some kind of support ticket that's created, there's a problem with the application. Usually Jira would issue a Jira issue number. So you would use, like, for example, that Jira issue number to create a branch, and you would use that specific branch to work on that specific issue, and the developer would work on it locally. So they're working on it locally, they've committed their changes, they pushed it to source on that particular branch. You can deploy that branch into whichever environment, like, for example, one of the staging environments or one of the testing environments, and QA can go over it. And it will be just a replica of the production environment if it's the staging environment, or if it's a test environment, it'll have some slight differences, but not too many, right?
So,
but the config plays into that. Go ahead.
Yeah, so let's talk about the config and using that instead of if statements, because currently I have, like an if statement for like mail configurations or something like that. So, or even certain variables. Like, hey, for the to field of this thing, if it's this, do this, so like how do you use configs to have those different environments, and how do you implement that? And then we're talking about right now number 3, but I do want to go into like in order as well. So go ahead.
Well, yeah. Dependencies and configs, they work well together. So one does lead into the other. So we'll just cover config, and then we can go back to the dependencies. So within the config section, you'll have, like, let's say, for example, it has to be staging. So for staging, let's say we're using a product called Pulumi. Have you ever heard of that?
You say gloomy?
No, Pulumi.
Pulumi, no.
I'll paste it.
I'm still like I'm still a noob with this type of stuff, man. Like, I do some intermediate stuff, but I'm really noobish with it. Like, I can go on so many different levels depending on who I'm talking to, but it's some stuff that's just like you know, I haven't experienced. I haven't been in the position to experience.
Okay. Well, so Pulumi allows you to store configuration values, basically. So for example, let's say we're in the staging environment. Well, the staging environment won't be using the exact same database as a production environment. So with the configuration, the configuration that you store within, for example, the one that I'm using, which is the cloud, I'll have a specific name. Like all the values will be different from what's stored in, like, for example, production. So let's say we have a variable called db_host. Well, that value for the staging environment, well, it'll be different. So it'll look like, let's see. Well, are you on the website?
Yeah, I'm on Pulumi.
Okay.
So I'm gonna post that in the main chat.
I kind of want to show you. See, this is why I want to show examples of what I mean. So let's just say during the integration process or even the deployment process, what will happen is the deployment or the automation that I've set up will pull the configuration information or the values that I've set for those variables into the Docker container, and it will set those values that are needed in order for it to pull the information from the right database or to connect to the right S3 bucket.
And when you say like set those values, that it's like, you know, hard coding and just doing the variable replacement. So like whatever the variable value is.
So yes, it would be hard coding at the container level, but you wouldn't store it in source, and that's what you want to avoid when it comes to the config parameter.
Okay. All right. So then, all right, at Pulumi, because I'm thinking of like, yeah, and guys, this is what Daniel, you know, he hit me with this out of nowhere. He says he wants to do more, and I was like, damn, Daniel, like, bro, a little bit at a time, bro. We can't be hitting them with all this at one time. They're gonna want to come back. They're gonna want to subscribe. You know, they're gonna want to do all those things. And like, you know, listen, just a little bit at a time, Daniel. No, but something like, it's just something really cool that he mentioned is that, like, hey, if we can start showing some examples and getting this together. So hopefully we can actually get together on that. You know, Daniel's extremely busy with stuff. So I want to make sure that, you know, it's something that he can actually afford to do in terms of time. But yeah, so go on with Pulumi, or do you want to go back to config?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not sure if it needs more explanation on the config, but essentially you use variables, and within those variables, the value would be a variable, right?
Right.
And that variable would then, for example, your application would pull the information from Pulumi, the actual value itself, and it'll set it at the environment level of the operating system of that container. So that way your application could use the values and connect to the right sources that it needs, the backing services.
Yeah, so for me, I have a core folder, and then it has my core.js. And then in core.js, I'll have things like some of these variables here. And then I always import, or not import, but require for Node.js. I require, you know, this file, and then it has some of my core functions as well. So things like random number generators or range number or random number generators in between a range, things like that. So is it something akin to this, but more robust? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm kind of doing it right, kind of, sort of, but not as good.
You're on par, man.
Yeah. I want to get better with it. And we started this talking about like, using if statements to do some of these things. So for instance, if we go back to, and you guys can always get to this code, this is the GAMR, the project code name Gamer. So that's the Grizzly autonomous mowing robot, I think is what it was, the full name. And that was produced by our guy, created by our guy Aquateki. So shout out to him for that. But I do things like primary. So let's increase the font. So here, I have like if process or if instance type is primary. And this is because, I run my Node.js app runs in cluster mode. So that's, one single threaded version or one version of the single threaded app per core. And what that allows me to do is have some type of pseudo or some type of clustering on the machine itself. So just in case anything happens to a process, something's always there to answer it. And then it also uses all the other cores. The problem is with that is that every core has access to any type of request or running a file or controlling a certain device. So what I have to do is I have an instance that is a primary instance that does fan control for this new project, or even cron job control. So like any scheduled thing, it doesn't redo it for every single process. So if I have 4 cores, 4 processes, it'll send 4 emails if I don't do this. So that's how I deal with that. Any thoughts on that before we move on? I don't know if like you have a better.
No. Is my mic too loud?
I can hear you.
Okay.
You're good.
Well, it's kind of like, for example, a web framework called Laravel. You can run it in a couple of different modes. So you have the app mode, and then you'll have like the queue mode. And you can set that similar to what you're talking about. The primary, that would be app mode. Queue mode would be like secondary. Anything that goes into the queue, it'll process different requests that are coming in that the app can't handle at that very moment. And that has other backing services that go along with that. So you can set that, you can set the app mode, like let's say there's an app mode variable. You can set the app mode variable to, let's just give it a random name, app mode name, just call it that. Not very creative, but it gets the job done.
Right.
So the app mode name would be a config that you set either in Pulumi config or whatever configuration service you want to use. And you can use the exact same application, same code. You can deploy multiple versions of it. You can have like 4 queue workers, and you would set it to where those 4 queue workers would deploy as queues, and then you'll have that one single application that deploys as the application itself.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like, because the biggest thing is about like, forking or background processes or even sub processes that run outside or handle things that are not on the main queue. So in a sense, it's non-blocking or non-blocking services, or providing a non-blocking. I might be using the wrong word, but providing a non-blocking like architecture to where you can always answer something. Like even if it's just saying, "Hey, listen, I'll take that so I can give it to somebody else."
Right.
So one of the ways I do that with PM2, which is what I use, some people use NodeMon for stuff. You'll see that in a lot of tutorials. I personally use PM2. It's like NodeMon, but then it does some other stuff that I like, and I've written some custom stuff for it as well in terms of like, getting information out of it and presenting it. And with this, you can say the first instance, and then you can actually set certain environment variables as well. And then you can have different types of environments. So you can have primary prod environment and then a primary dev environment. So you still have the instance type of primary, but then you have a prod and a dev environment for that. And then you can have all different types of like, environment variables. Environment types. So prod, dev, staging, so on and so forth. And that's kind of how I use it. And then it has some like really cool stuff here. So for instance, the instance is 1, and then all the other instance is -1, meaning, you know, you can do as many cores as available -1 or even 2. So that's something that's cool about PM2, guys. I wanted to like touch on that before we get back to our main objective here. So I did want to go into code base, and Dan, I know it's reaching the 11 o'clock mark Eastern on our side. How do you feel about moving forward?
Give me 1 second. I'm checking in now with the team.
Okay, I'll get this started while you're doing that. So I just want to break down little bit by little bit these different sections. One is code base. Oh, and Dan, let me know if you need to mute me or anything like that, or if you want me to stop so you can listen. So
I'm replying to messages. That's fine. I can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. I didn't know if like you were on a call or something. All right. So yeah. So one code base tracked in version control, many deploys. A 12-factor app is always tracked in a version control system such as Git, Mercurial, or Subversion. A copy of the revision tracking database is known as a code repository, often shortened to code repo or just repo. So first section, first bit, this is all about not just having a more performant app or a app that can be scaled, but it's more about having an app that has its shit together. You know, it's organized. It's something that anybody can go into and, you know, building, as Kendra D would say, a system order and system order and structure. Having all those things in, having all those things defined and in one place to where you can start looking at it as somewhat of a guide or Bible, if you will, or a hitchhiker's guide to the galaxy of building an app. So it's like something like this. This is kind of one of those things where it's just like, yeah, of course you would have it. But then, you know, Dan had a story earlier where the guy was doing sneakernet with, you know, or emails back and forth with code base and source code, you know, and it's like, it doesn't make it.
It's one of them. Okay, so I'm sorry that just kind of it was frustrating, to be honest, because this person didn't leave any notes for the next developer that came in, because this person just left abruptly. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're sitting there with code. You don't know at what point in a feature that this person is developing, or if this person is even working on a bug fix. So you have to go through all of these notes. You got to go through all of these notes that this person keeps in a notepad at his desk as to what's being worked on, but there are no dates on it. Look, it was horrible. So you just kind of have to
the notepad.
Oh yeah, very lucky. Seriously, very lucky person left a notepad. But those are the things you can kind of get by. You can also check, like for example, in Git, you can you'll leave comments. Like usually people leave comments as to what they changed and why they changed it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they'll leave a link to a web page you can go to and read more about why they changed what they changed. You know, just depends on who the developer is and, you know, how long they've been doing it. Because usually you'll get some people that'll just leave a couple of lines saying updating this file, and there's nothing else, no context to it. They assume that you already know how the application works and what this particular file is used for. You know what I mean? So it just depends on who the developer is, but the comment section is really great. So it just helps keep everything organized.
And talking about that and leaving notes, one of the things I've done is, you know, getting better with leaving notes. So I'll even do the source of a code snippet that I found online. Like there's no shame in it to me. It's like, hey, listen, I found this real quick function that generates a random integer, and this is exactly where I got it from. So you can go back and look at it and see where I made any changes, if any, or I can go back and look at it and be like, oh man, what was that thing? Instead of going through the tens of thousands of bookmarks that I have, because I do have that many bookmarks. And it's just like trying to find all that information or that type of information in my bookmarks. No. So it's good to put that in your code and comment that in your code as well. And even explain some of the things. And I've gotten a lot better with that now as I'm writing code that other people are viewing. And that's the biggest thing, is people possibly, as your project grows and hopefully your business and the use case for your software that you're developing grows, then more people are going to look at it. And with that, you want to give them little guides, snippets, and things like that to help them along.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I sometimes when I first start, developing a script, I have a whole ritual I go through for, setting up. I'll probably show you sometime, but
yeah.
Essentially, if I need help on anything, I'll first leave that note, just like you said before. You leave a link to the web address, and you'll leave a brief description as to why you're using this particular, this particular algorithm, if you will. Because sometimes you'll just grab someone's algorithm because it works, and you don't have the time to write your own. So that's what I use comments for to an extent, and mostly when I have like a finished product, or even before I get to that point, I really just take those same comments and I put them in the comment section of the commit. That way a person can see it immediately, but it also keeps the source code clean,
So what you bring up a good thing, good point, and this is something that I started doing before I left my last job, is and it was prompted by Jermaine, my former boss. He wanted to do this move where a ticket for everything. So I had to change the way I was doing it, because I would just do git add period, and then git commit whatever the the line is for that, and put a message in there, and then git push. And it's just like that would sometimes be 2 weeks worth of work. And then a friend of mine, like, he sent me this video that I shared in the chat. It's the YouTube video, and I share it often now. But he would, like, when I told him, he was like, listen, bro, we would have meetings with you about that. Like, we would be talking to you like, what are you doing? I was just like, I don't know, because there's a lot of things when you're working alone, like that one guy that had the source code on one computer. It's like when you're working alone, you can get away with so much because nobody's there to check you.
Dude, one thing that's helped me over time is making small commits and not like large batch commits. I make very small once. Okay, so let's go through this. So for an example, as soon as I get started on a project, I'll create like the blank file that I'm going to be working with. Let's say, for example, I'm making a bash script. I usually have like a bash template that I use for almost everything. Of course, I rearrange a couple of things, but there's a base level that I operate from. So you commit that base level file as init commit for this particular branch. That stands for initial commit. And then once I make a change, for example, I make changes to the environment variables, and then I do like a couple of tests, like function tests. And if those work, then I commit that. That way I incrementally, so I'll have like 20 commits for maybe like 2 hours of work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a little overkill, but at the same time, you get to see every step of the process of what I'm doing. That way there is no confusion when we speak.
So I've gotten a bit of a middle ground. Like last night, I did I wrote code for a fan regulator using Arduino, or using an Arduino and using the PWM pins. So that's a feature, right? And I only worked on that feature. Plus, well, no, I didn't. I actually worked on some core stuff too, because I was having problems with the run. So with that should have been broken up into two, but I made it one major commit because it was like the first time really working with the software. But usually what I do now, what I've grown accustomed to, is I would do a git add, and then you could do a git add -p period, I believe. Yeah, p -p period, and that's for partial. So with that, it'll actually go through every file that you've changed, and then say, do you want to add this to the commit that you're working on? Then when you run your git commit, instead of me doing a git commit and then -a-m and then put in my message, now I just do a git commit. And then that gives me a file, or it opens up the file editor, or my text editor, Nano. And then I put in more stuff about it, and I'm a little bit more descriptive and verbose. So the first line is the usual commit line that you see on the repo. And then below that, it starts to, you put a space, and then below that, it actually gives you a nice, like, you could write your whole 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs of what you did and why you did it, and purposes, or anything else that you want to put in there. And then I do a push on that. And then I can do that as I step through all the different files. So I could have broken up what I did last night into two different sections in a sense, or two different commits, and fix, or have my fix. But I kind of fell back into my old ways, and I did pretty much a big batch commit. So those are things that you can do, and that's like what this first portion of the 12-factor app is about, is having a code base with revision control, and then you can actually do little things to the code base, and then you can have different types of deploys along with that, and it makes it easier to work with larger groups.
Absolutely. And one thing that kind of made me laugh, because I just realized I haven't used Git in the command line in a while. Like I usually, yeah, man, I use a GUI, dude.
Yeah, you're Mr. Visual Studio Code.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Because Visual Studio Code, they have what is this thing called? I can't remember the name of it. But anyways,
Visual Studio Code has a plugin for everything.
Yeah, it has. Yeah. You can have an extension to connect to a remote server and make the changes. And you have like a Git client that's built into it, so it's pretty convenient. But yeah, I just kind of chuckled to myself about that. I'm like, oh man, this dude.
That's something that Daniel gets on me about all the time, because like my IDE is literally a screen session, aka tmux, or not aka, but like tmux. For people that use tmux, screen is the same thing. It allows you to have like virtual terminals within a terminal. So I log into a server using Termius or even Putty. And then with screen, I can always go back. I can attach and detach to that screen. So it's like I could leave my desk, move to another computer, and then go back to where I left off. And then, you split it, and then you work with Nano. So my IDE of choice is a Putty session, running screen, editing files with Nano.
Putty. Jesus Christ.
Look at that. See? Daniel, like totally, like not opposites, but like different sides of the spectrum there on that one.
That's true. The last time I can't remember the last time I used a Windows machine, to be honest. I usually, whenever I get a new machine, well, at home, I use Ubuntu for a lot of my local stuff.
Yeah, but I log into Ubuntu boxes. Like Windows is my like desktop operating system of choice. Just
so what do you do? Like use the virtual machine then for certain things?
No, I use physical machines, and then I'll do virtual machines here and there. Maybe I have a Proxmox box, like I have one in my network now, and I gotta like consolidate and move everything to it. I've used Hyper-V, on computers as well. Like I think I have a VM that runs Hyper-V. I'm all over the place with it. But in terms of what I would recommend, I use Windows for my everyday because it's just easier drivers. And then, of course, I get better visual drivers as well, or video drivers. If it's just a single screen and not multi-screen moving things all over the place, I can use Ubuntu. But then I log into Ubuntu servers running usually Ubuntu Minimal or Nano. Or actually, I think it's Minimal, because it's a little bit bigger than Nano, I think, for Ubuntu. But Ubuntu server, that is. I don't run desktop. I haven't run desktop in a while.
Yeah, I'm using desktop for just, regular dev stuff. I use Ubuntu, the LTS server disk release. That's what, man. Oh, man. Red Hat. They discontinued CentOS. That pissed me off.
Are you serious? When did they do that?
See, dude, earlier this year or sometime last year.
Oh God, that's crazy. People like that was people's whole entire business case. That was like people use CentOS religiously.
Yeah.
Like you can't even say Ubuntu. Be like, no, it doesn't have access to the Red Hat repos or RPM.
Right. Right.
Now look at your bitch ass. You ain't got shit.
Yeah, man. Well, fortunately, I've been able to decommission quite a few of those servers, and most of that stuff was dev anyway. So.
Yeah, and the only thing is, what I liked about CentOS, it wasn't Fedora, because Fedora was super bloated with a lot of stuff when I used to use it. Fedora used to be super bloated. Like they just had, and the startups were like so much longer, to me at least.
Yeah, I stay away from it. That was for people who like to live life on the edge. That wasn't me. I wanted to get as close to the Red Hat Enterprise version as I could, and CentOS was that.
Yeah, like Fedora, I used to use that for all types of stuff. And even in production, some of their like instead of using like Windows file server or Active Directory, I would use Fedora for that type of stuff and Samba, and then it would work for a little bit. Yeah. But yeah, continuing on. Sorry, went down memory lane on that one.
That's all right.
So, just going on a little bit more about this, guys. Definitely go ahead and read this yourself, and take this apart where you can. Like what I like to do with some of these conversations is get it started and then talk about the experiences, because then that I feel that is a little bit more relatable than just reading it, because then it gets you into a better mindset when talking about this stuff. So it is expected that you guys read this yourself, and then hopefully we can get together to show, how some of these things look. And I'm already showing it in terms of looking at some of my code base and stuff like that. And I already show it in terms of what I do. But you can see where I don't do a lot of this yet. What's it called as we go along. So a code base is a single repo in a centralized revision control system like Subversion, or any set of repos who share a root commit in a decentralized version control system like Git. So the biggest thing about the code base or a repo, it's siloed, or it's stored somewhere, and it's not. And when they say siloed or centralized, it's stored on a server, but you can actually have multiple repos that you sync your information to or sync your code base to. So if you have GitHub, GitLab, they all run Git, which is the actual protocol, binary really, or protocol
application. So it's a CLI application,
right? So that's Git, but then GitHub is the actual storage point for that most people use. There's also things like, I believe Bitbucket is another one that's from Confluence.
Yeah. Bitbucket is by Atlassian, and they make a whole suite of products.
Yeah.
Most people usually go with, and GitLab is another one of the popular software as a service options that you can go with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I use GitLab for some of my private repos, like when I have my own little GitLab server, but I would never keep it up. The only reason I used it at the time was because GitHub would only allow you to do like a couple private repos, like I think like 2 private repos. Yeah.
Oh, the free version?
Yeah, the free version. Yeah. Now it's unlimited.
Yeah. Well, for the free version, really?
Yeah, I think it's like
if you do public, it's unlimited. But private, I don't think you can. I think you can only do like maybe 1 private repo on in the free version. But I mean, the paid version is only like $10 for the year. I don't know.
You can do multiple. You can do definitely more than 2, because that used to be the limit. And I know that only because my repo. Yeah, there's probably like 3 things that are not showing up here for sure.
Oh, wow, yeah. It is unlimited public and private repo.
It's unlimited? Okay.
Yeah, I just went to the pricing page.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that happened right before Microsoft bought them out, or maybe as it was happening.
No, that had to be after. I remember the pricing before Microsoft bought it. I thought it was even when Microsoft bought it. I thought they were going to pull a Red Hat and discontinue a product and then integrate all the features into their own product.
Right.
They did that with Tectonic. I don't know if you know what that is.
No, not at all.
It's a what is it? It's a containerization management system that uses Kubernetes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's what was the other thing that they did that they bought out? I think Microsoft owns LinkedIn. Or who owns LinkedIn? Is it Microsoft or Salesforce?
It's a Microsoft.
It's Microsoft, right? Yeah. So Microsoft's buying a lot of these things, some of these social media, but like not obscure, but business code base of social medias. Because like I didn't know this about GitHub, but there's like a lot of things you can subscribe to, or a lot of repos that you could follow. And then, some of these repos are whole articles, or projects are whole articles, or way of doing things. Like even things like doing dot files and having a repo for your dot files.
Huh.
Which is pretty cool. Like I didn't know that was like a whole thing or a following, but people have repos of all of their config files and things like that. So when they go on new systems, they would download that repo.
Oh, okay, like a gist.
Oh, well, they would have, yeah, so you could have the gist, right? But then the dot files is like they would have I guess they, instead of doing it in gist, they actually just do like actual repos of it.
Huh.
Yeah, it's like a whole thing. There's a pretty cool video on that. On Fireship.io. I have to find it.
Yeah, send me that link.
Yeah, I'm gonna put it in the chat now, and then we'll move on. Copy link address. There's a pretty good video. The guy brought in someone else that talked about dot files. All right, so second one is dependencies, and if we can, we'll get to config.
We kind of just covered config.
Yeah, we did, right? Yeah. So dependencies, explicitly declare and isolate dependencies. Most programming languages offer a packaging system for distributing support libraries such as CPAN for Perl, Ruby Gems for Ruby, or pip or npm. So
Yeah.
pip for Python, npm for Node.
Well, yeah.
Libraries libraries installed through a package system can be installed system-wide, known as site packages, or scoped into the directory containing the app, known as vendoring or building. And I do this a lot. There's not too many system-wide packages that I install unless it's like PM2. But for the most part, it's always scoped into the actual application itself, and that just bundles everything together, especially when you go to install it and things like that. And that's another thing, writing install scripts, man. Like I'm trying to get better with that as I start making products that I want to deploy multiple times, like this lawnmowing project. Like I'm thinking about a lot of that stuff now.
Curious, where would you deploy? You mean just like deployed in different environments?
Or deployed on different systems. Like, so I want to sell this automated lawnmower. So it's like, all right, I got to do an install script on every Raspberry Pi that I have or something like that. Or find a way to
use a container.
I guess I could, but I don't know about that. That's one. And then two, I have it installed on Raspberry Pis. So I think can you run? Okay.
Yeah, you can run Docker on, like for example, Docker is a containerization platform basically, and you can compile everything that you need into that little process, store it as an image, and deploy it anywhere that you're running the Docker binary. And it's very straightforward. It's simple. I love it. I use it for every web application with the exception of a few because they're really ancient and that requires a little more white glove treatment, if you will.
Right.
But yeah, no, the containers, you can deploy them anywhere, destroy them, redeploy them, and it happens within a matter of maybe 30 seconds, depending on whether or not that image is already on that particular piece of equipment.
Now, I can understand that because I've used like OpenVZ from back in the day, and then everything is like, it's kind of like a virtual machine, but I think even lighter. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, you can look at it that way. Yeah.
Okay.
You can definitely look at it that way.
And OpenVZ had its drawbacks too, and its things that you had to get over. So it's not like containers as well, because that containers are just like their own process. So OpenVZ was like, you would share the file systems, and that would be a problem. But how does that work with, say, accessing USB devices and GPIO pins and things like that? Any insight into that?
It's a good question. I probably have to look into that. But usually, you don't know. I'll just leave it at I'll have to look into that. I'm not going to make any wild assumptions about how it would work.
Because that was like a thing with virtual machines where it was like such a it was a big stride or improvement when virtual machines, you could start having access to USB devices that were on the host system. Like when they started making those architecture, or instruction set changes to the processors to where you can actually give them PCI devices and stuff like that too.
I don't doubt it would operate any differently. I think it would more so require, well, I'm making an assumption right now. I would assume that you would use like volumes for that, because a volume you would basically map, I guess, like a file location or directory. For example, in Linux, like if you're just using the MNT or the mount directory, and you have whatever you're mounting, you can just mount it from there.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's great because with the Linux architecture, everything is pretty much a file.
Yeah.
So you can, like, you know, if you wanted to give a USB drive, you can, can you feed that to the container?
I'll have to find out.
Okay. All right.
But I was just speculating just now. I don't know if it would actually work.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. That's kind of one of the things that I wouldn't say hold me back, but that would be hold me back that I would have to find out more about, because you bring up a good point that, you know, you can just deploy these things, right? And especially, and that's another thing is where if you have make changes to your repo and your app if you design your app in a somewhat modular fashion, it should be pretty easy to run updates to where they're like, you know, the person can run updates and get a new feature, but it doesn't destroy maybe some old stuff. And I've actually started to kind of rewrite some of my applications to where I have like I try to do little to no changes to my index.js. Like my index.js is the same for every single app now. Like it's getting to that point. In this case, I had to make some changes, and there's some stuff I got to take out here that I was just trying to test around and mess with. And also some MongoDB stuff that I got to take out and figure out how I'm going to deal with that for systems that don't run MongoDB, because, you know, this file is always the same. So I got to run some checks into that. But for the most part, this should not change. It should always be the same, and I shouldn't have to add anything to this. Now, what I added, though, as an entry point to the index.js to where you can actually make changes, or to the app itself and make any changes and add stuff at quote unquote runtime, is my app specific code. So depending on my app, I would put something in my app specific code file, which is app.js. And then this is where I'd run things like my fan control, you know, like if primary run fan control. And then this is how I would feed all of that stuff. Like I feed whole functions into this. This is my tie-in point, if you will.
Yeah.
So if you start writing your code to the point where you can either containerize it to make it easier to deploy, and also containers have great benefits too in terms of replicating environments with little to no changes. But then, for instance, if you write your code base a certain way, you can actually upgrade certain things. Like it used to be destructive to do changes to WordPress or something like that. Yeah. And then, you know, you'd update your WordPress and then you forgot about that one change that, you know, WordPress will overwrite that file and break your whole website, and you'd have to go back and try to figure it out again.
Yeah, man. There have been a lot of strides that have been made to improve the experience of change management. And Docker has containerization as a whole, even virtualization, has made a huge impact on the amount of time you spend. And also it gives you the freedom of making mistakes, right? Let's say you have a container that is a production container that anywhere you run it, it's going to run exactly the same. There are no flaws, you know, all that. And let's say someone pushes a change to the master branch, and that gets deployed out to production. And there may have been something that wasn't seen in the development environment or even the staging environment. There'd be something that's just off in production that wasn't accounted for. Mm-hmm. That goes into production, it causes all kind of problems. All you have to do is make one change, especially if you're using like Kubernetes. You just change the image version number. If you're using version numbers, you just change the image version number, and it switches right back within a couple of seconds. So there's
okay. So you can have revision control of your containers.
Yeah.
Beautiful, man. That's cool. That's cool. And then what about that in comparison to Docker? I guess does Docker that have that functionality as well?
The Docker is the containerization platform that you're using.
Okay.
So there are different versions of containerization or different binaries you can use to run containers, different types of containers, right? But Docker is the primary one that everyone uses.
Okay, and then all right, so explain a little bit of this, and this will probably be the last thing, because I want to I did some coding projects I want to do too after this, but explain how the difference between Docker and Kubernetes, or the similarities, or how does that all how does that stack up? Because I don't understand it.
So let's say Docker is what containers are built from, right? So there's a Docker file, and you issue whatever it is you want to be in that Docker container. Docker builds the container for you, and you can deploy. You can send that container out to your repository, your Docker repository. You can send it to whatever repository. You can deploy it anywhere that runs Docker. Kubernetes is the management aspect of, the container platforms, right? So Google Cloud has their own. I think Google Cloud. I forgot what they call it. What they call their distribution. I don't use it. I use AWS, but AWS has their own iteration of it. And then, there are on-premises solutions you can use that are free. You can deploy containers through, and you can use Kubernetes is pretty much the management plane of Docker or containers. Let's just say just containers.
Okay.
So you want to set up ingress, you want to set up the services, you want to set up the deployment itself. You can manage the containers through deployments, which allow you to have rolling deployments to where the user, like the customer, wouldn't even notice if the actual application has been changed or updated. The only way you'd know is if there was, for example, we use version numbers. We leave the version number at the foot of the page. And that's how you would really know if the application has been updated or not, because the version number's changed. But outside of that, you would not know.
Yeah, one thing I do like is the idea of evergreen applications, where they're always updating, and it's almost seamless in some cases. It's always up to date, and having your architecture actually provide that for you and your customer is pretty awesome. One thing I was doing in terms of my foray into that was building a downloader app, and it was an Electron app. And what it would do is it had its code. It had very minimal code in the actual Electron app for itself, because all it would do is go out and it would use Azure Blob Storage. It would go out and say, okay, there was with Azure Blob Storage, for those that do or don't know, or don't know mostly, you can with Azure Blob Storage, you can it'll give you a primary and a secondary URL for your blob storage that you can access all of your whatever your blobs are, or your files, so on and so forth. And I would actually write. I wrote a almost like a ping, if you will, or a status check, and it would just use Axios, and then check if a file is available or something is available. And if that file is available, then it would use that URL in the array, and then just get out of the loop, right? But if it wasn't available, it would go to the second one, of course. So I wrote it as a way of high availability. But all it would do is check for that file, download it. If it was once it has the right URL, it would download that file, and then it would just run the JavaScript, because Electron apps is just your Node.js in a sense, but it's an actual app, and it takes the browser as the middleman. It gives you full access to the system's IO and everything, for those that don't know. And that was super cool, because now if I wanted to push updates, all I would have them do is close the app and open it back up. And it would, essentially it would always be going back to that blob storage URL and downloading whatever it needed to, because everything was stored in the cloud at that point in terms of executed code. I was like, cool, like a really cool thing.
That's pretty cool. I'm wondering how does it kind of work like what's it called? I don't use it often. I know OneDrive has something similar to that, to where it syncs with the cloud.
Yeah, so it wouldn't sync per se. So Azure Blob Storage would be kind of like, you just have like a regular web storage on a web server, and you can store static files on there. So not dynamic files, of course, but static files. So I would have it go out and download the whatever .js file, and then it would just run it in the Electron app, because the Electron app is pretty much just like it has the V8 runtime, I believe. And then it would just parse the JavaScript and run it like a web page, but in the form of an actual app, which is like super nice. So yeah, that was like, it was a pretty cool thing.
Yeah, that does sound pretty cool. What was it called again?
You would use like Electron boilerplate. I'll find the repo, but it's like the Electron boilerplate. Oh, hold on. Let me zoom out here. Reset. Electron boiler. And this would be the GitHub. There's Electron React. I think this is it. Oh, shoot. Darn it. There's a couple of them. I'll have to find the exact one, but I think it's this one. So I would use this as my base. So it would be a regular Electron app. And then I wrote my code to do what I was talking about, that type of logic.
Yeah.
If you want that, I'd have to just get it from the repo that it's in.
What does it check, like the file hash?
Not even the file hash. It did an Axios call, Axios get call, and then it would check if the file exists. So with Axios, huh?
Oh, no, I'm just saying, I get it now.
Yeah. So for those for others, like, with Axios, what it would do is like it would give you a status code. So if it gave you like status 200 or something like that, or other than 200, then I had to write Axios in a way to where it actually produced that as a number. Then I could write an if statement. So I can assign that to a variable and then write an if statement based off or a conditional based off of that. So that was kind of one of the harder parts about that, just to say, hey, listen, and so I didn't have to deal with it in an asynchronous manner, or I still had to deal with it in an asynchronous manner, but I didn't have to do .thens and stuff like that, or too many .thens. I can actually assign it to a variable and then do a conditional based off the variable. For me, that was cleaner code. So then it would give me a 500, but it wouldn't fail per se. Like it wouldn't give me like a crazy failure. It would just say, hey, this file doesn't exist. And then I could write a conditional on it and then report something in the Electron app itself. But that way, everything stayed evergreen. But yeah. I think that's it. We went over. Oh, that's another article I was reading. We'll read this last part. So a 12-factor app never relies on complicit existence of system-wide packages. It declares all dependencies completely and exactly via a dependency declaration manifest. Furthermore, it uses a dependency isolation tool during execution to ensure that no implicit dependencies leak in from the surrounding system. The full and explicit dependency specification is applied uniformly to both production and development. So that's something that, like, I definitely don't do well enough. So for instance, I have an issue with MongoDB and the system doesn't have MongoDB installed. How do I deal with that? Like, what should I do? Like, how do I make that check? Now I have to actually make an actual check to get that up and running. So that's one thing that, like, I'll definitely be upfront about, is that I'll have to use things like making sure that the system has Mongo installed, or MongoDB installed. It's like, how do you do that? And how do you make sure that that dependency is always there, or that your app knows what to do when that dependency is not there? So in my case, that dependency is not there. So now I have to comment out a whole bunch of different files to make sure that, you know, I account for that. So that's definitely something that's important. Dan said he had to step away for a little bit, but we're almost ending here, and I'll get like the last, when he does come back, we'll get the last bit of last words from him, and then we'll close it up for the night. Oh, you're back?
Yeah. Sorry, I had to check on myself.
You're good. All right. So with that being said, I don't know if you heard what I said, but, you know, just talking about the 12-factor app being isolated, all dependencies are within the app itself. Any stories or thoughts about that before we close out?
Yeah. Let me turn this down. Do you hear an echo?
A little bit, not too bad though.
Okay. Well, dependencies are very important, especially when you're going between different versions of a particular, dependency. You can have dependency locks to where you set it to where, for example, let's say I have an application that uses. Sorry, gotta answer this. Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Nice ringtone. I'm sorry, what?
Funny ringtone.
Yeah. It's a great song.
But yeah, dependency locks.
Dependency locks, yeah. So sometimes you get an application working to where there aren't any errors, but you also want to upgrade. Well, someone wants to upgrade one of the dependencies. Let's say you have like a PDF package that you want to use. Excuse me. So, I mean, with the dependency lock, essentially, you would use that to lock everything else in place, or even that. I'm kind of random. Let me take that back a step, because I'm talking about. Let's see. Which one am I going to talk about? Composer. Let's take composer.lock. There are certain things you just don't want to change about the application, but you also don't want to be stuck in place with certain things. Let's say a developer is working locally, they want to update some of these packages, so they may set the composer.lock. Like, for example, you look at this. Let's take cron, the cron package. You may want to update that to like 1.8.5.
Right.
But that may break something in the system. The composer.lock file is there to make sure that nothing breaks in the system, or at least the last known configuration that worked is there. That way, when people make deployments to production or even like a staging environment, those changes won't affect anything. When I say affect anything, I mean like for the environment that's being deployed, not necessarily your local development environment, because you may need to install new packages, and it may require new packages that are a part of the dependencies of a dependency, right? So it's just a way to keep track of all that stuff.
Yeah, so in Node.js apps, you'll have the package.lock or package-lock.json file. And this just shows you, like, this lock file here has, you know, the dependencies as they were, or the versions, sorry for the train, guys, has the versions as they were when, you know, it was last updated. So you would run, like, you know, an npm install, it would have all that stuff for you. That's for your local system. But if you run an npm install, it would get everything for your dependencies list from your package.json, and then it would create that lock file or do any updates. One thing about this, one thing you'll notice is that I have the caret symbol in some cases. What that just means is instead of me having compression 1.7.4, that's locked to that version. So kind of like what Dan was just talking about is if I wanted 1.7.5, I would have to, in this case, go ahead and change this to 175. Whereas if I have the caret, that tells me I need any version above 1.19, so I can't go any lower. So that's one way of like, I can't downgrade a package. I can only go to that revision and higher in some cases, or if I just have the file name or not the version number, I can only just do that version. So it's things like that you get into, and I don't know if there's any other ways of like writing this out that I know of, but I'm sure there's like other things that you can do to make sure that you have even a certain strain of subversions, even like a 3.2 strain, 3.2.x. So you can never go past 3.2.x.
Yeah. Man, it's been a while since I've actually had to edit one of these files. I usually just use that or leave that to the developers, because I usually check it for security holes, using like in Docker or whatever, or even in the package management system. I don't know if npm has this, but Composer has it. Well, no, npm does have it. You can check for security holes in some of the packages. I just forgot what the command was for that.
Yeah, because now it's like it'll tell you on the command line. And of course, GitHub will start like, if you have like an old Lodash version or something like that, it'll annoy the hell out of you and send you a bunch of emails. And then another thing that I do here is, for instance, there's some things, because I have a boilerplate script that creates my Node.js. And you were like, yeah, it's probably one of the first videos that I remember you chiming in on. I was creating a Node.js boilerplate.sh, and I still work on that and make changes to that. Now I have to make these changes with Mongo. Like if it's not installed, do this. But one of the things that I had to do with that is, what did I have to do with that one? So one of the things I have to do with this is like actually have it install.sh that installs other dependencies that are app specific. So that's another reason, like I have my boilerplate to create my Node.js project that asks me a couple questions. It's a bash script. I could use Inquirer, which is a Node.js or a npm module or Node.js module. But I use bash and ask all the questions, and then it fills in certain things for me, asks me for my Git password, creates the repo, and does all types of other stuff for me, which is great. But then if I wanted something like, Johnny 5, so I can control Arduino devices from Node.js, then I'd have to actually put in like, these are the app specific dependencies. So in terms of the install, what I'd probably do is now that I look at this, I have to add npmi to install all the packages, and then even add extra packages as well, such as installing Johnny 5. So that's like, those are things that you look at when you're trying to automate the build process for a lot of stuff and make refinements where possible. And, it gets boring and it gets tedious, but it also creates a better product and better and faster deployments for you. So Dan, with that being said, is there any closing thoughts that you have for part 1 of this series?
Closing thoughts. I would essentially say just read through code base and get very familiar with Git, because Git is the primary source control system that most developers use out in the wild or even in a professional environment. It's just the most popular, easier to use. And I think npm is a good one to get started with package management.
Or pip for those Python heads.
Yeah. Or pip. Yeah, pip is good too.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, in most cases, people will end up using JavaScript because that's the majority of the developers nowadays.
Yeah.
Or almost every. I think like almost. Did you see that Stack Overflow survey in 2021? Oh man, it's almost like 90% of developers use JavaScript at this point. It's like the primary go-to language. So
yeah, Bro, it's such an easy language to get. Well, once you get a hold of it, JavaScript, having it from front to back is a thing of beauty. But you start to see where JavaScript itself takes in so many things from different languages, like string interpolation, optional chaining, which is something that I mentioned in the last video, but I couldn't find which ECMAScript standard that it was introduced in, or ES standard is introduced into JavaScript. But you know, having optional chaining to where instead of having to write, you know, if this property in this object exists, you know, now you can just do the property name or the object name, its subproperty, and then do like a question mark period. And then that is the same as a undefined, or if it can't find it, it'll say undefined. Otherwise, it will go ahead and find it, and you don't have to do all these different, like, you know, if nested if statements to see if this property four levels down in your JSON object exists or not. You know, so JavaScript is great with that because it gets it from other places. Like a friend of mine, when he saw it, he's like, oh yeah, we do that in Ruby. And I'm like, damn, I thought we were like, you know, new. But JavaScript's great in that way where a lot of stuff is coming in.
Yeah, I think what is it? ECMAScript 2000. I don't want to say 9. I don't think it was 9. It's either 2. I forget the different version numbers, but yeah, they're introducing quite a few things. I think you can check what is that TC39 for the proposals.
I don't know. Is that where the RFC is for that, or?
No, not the RFC. They actually have a ECMAScript proposal page on GitHub to where you can see the latest proposals, things that have actually graduated and made it into source.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I think they have it divided up into stages. Give me a second. Like I think it's like stage 1 through 3.
Yeah, put that in the chat if you can find it. I'm gonna look for it myself. Well, but with that, actually, while you're doing that,
there it is. There you go.
You got it? All right, cool. So yeah, TC39. Okay. So stage 1, stage 0, finished proposals, inactive proposals. Okay. So for those that, you know, want to really get into it, and it's always nice to like be ahead of the game. Also, one thing I do definitely recommend is like, you know, guys, listen, like if you're into Node.js or even JavaScript, go ahead and join the Node.js developer channel. Like they'll sit there and do like streams where it's like 2 of us in there. I don't watch them often, but I'll catch them every so often in terms of when they're actually doing a live stream. And it'll be 2 or 3 people in there. And like, you know, they're talking about what is going on with Node.js and, you know, all the changes that they're making and stuff like that. This stuff is not popular, but it's nice to actually be a part of the community in that fashion instead of like, you know, being reactive to it. You can also be proactive and learning ahead of time and refining yourself and your skills. So definitely, you guys, like I definitely would love you guys to actually start getting into those things. In fact, let me put this in there and let me get their channel as well. YouTube, the boob tube, Node.js. Let's see, filters. I only want channels. Here we go. Yeah, okay, should be this one here. So yeah, so they'll actually do maintenance team meeting. Like they'll actually go through and actually do these meetings and they'll live stream them. And it's really cool to kind of be a part of that a little bit and listen into it, especially even some of the product stuff for different products that you might use and things like that. Node.js. And these are the guys that are actually writing the code. These are the guys that are actually like looking at this stuff, and you can almost, in a sense, have their ear, if you will. you'll see that this was streamed 11 days ago, only 260 views. So you can really be a part of like, oh, okay, this is coming down the pipe, you know. Bleeding edge and some of that stuff might not be the best thing to listen to, and you have to filter it out because it may never really make it to production. But in some cases, you can be a part of like, you know, seeing, you know, things before they kind of happen, which is cool.
My assumption is they explain the reasoning behind why they're implementing certain features, right?
Yeah. Like they'll talk about like, you know, actual pull requests live and other issues and bug fixes that they're implementing. So you can actually go to the repo for Node.js and they'll actually start, you know, they'll go over it in the video and they'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, this has been, we did a pull on this. I pushed this commit, or I committed this change, and then they'll merge it into the branch and stuff like that, which is really cool.
Nice.
All right, guys. With that being said, I want to say thank you to Dan. I thank you so much for your time. And I know, you know, Dan's a busy guy. Like he's currently working or looking at 1,000 Kubernetes cluster thingy mabobbers. I sounded like such a freaking
sorry, dude.
A non-technical person with that.
But you're right. I'm actually working at the same time we're talking.
Yeah. But I'll end it right there, guys. Thank you so much for listening. You know, hey, guys, always take time to grow. Always take time to make yourself better. You know, a lot of people always talk about, I want this, I want that, I want more, so on and so forth. And then, you know, you ask them, okay, what did you do last night? I just binged a series on Netflix. And it's just like, it takes me probably 2, sometimes 3 sittings to watch even a Netflix movie. You know, in some cases, because I'm just not going to sit there the whole time and watch this movie all the way through, you know. So, you know, prioritize, you know, like I'm gonna get off of this and I'm gonna work for another hour. It's almost 1 a.m. It's going to be 12 minutes to 12 now. I'm probably going to work until 1:30 or so. And then I have to get back up tomorrow and, you know, start working at 8 o'clock in the morning. So, you know, guys, do more so you can get more, plain and simple. All right. Oh, Jermaine says, thank you, guys. Jermaine stayed the whole damn time. That's my boy.
I did. Nice.
Yeah, man. He probably cut back in. He probably fell asleep in his chair. But yeah, thanks to Jermaine, and thanks for those that you know, listen on the playback. I appreciate you greatly, and I'll leave it with that. Thank you so much. Good night, guys.